Hi, everyone. My name's Jody Saltzman. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Jewish Family Service. Welcome. I welcome you to the room and to the session of Holistic Health and Crisis Remediation and De-escalation. Hopefully you're in the right place. It's good to have you here. Just a couple housekeeping things before we start. We would like everyone to listen with an open mind. As you know, we're all here to learn. You are encouraged to take what you have learned with you today without sharing other people's personal stories that might have been shared in the spirit of our learning community. If anyone needs extra assistance or wants to access counseling professional today, we have some on site. Signal to me, I'll be in the back of the room, or stop at the information table in the atrium. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Anderson. Mark Anderson is an executive director of the Barbara Schneider Foundation, an organization named after a woman who was tragically killed by responding officers in the year 2000 in her own home when she was in a mental health crisis. The foundation works with police, jails, hospitals, social workers, educators, local government, courts, and community members to improve the response to individuals who are in a mental health crisis and to prevent the escalation of crisis. He was policy aide to U.S. Senator Paul Wellstone from 1990 to 2002, working on mental health, healthcare, and human rights reform initiatives in the U.S. Senate. Mark has been the founding executive director of the Barbara Schneider Foundation since 2002. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I get started, let me just say, back on the table there, I got three little pieces. They're on the table downstairs too, but this talks a little bit about our training that we provide. This tells a little bit of background on the Barbara Schneider Foundation. And this is a de-escalation card. It gives a little bit the approach on the inside. It's nice, it's small, so you can put it in your pocket or put it on your desk, but it's got some kind of summarizes the approach, and then on the back has crisis numbers for the 7-county metro area. So if any of those are of interest, those are on the back table there. So we're going to go for about an hour. This is based on a 40-hour training, and so it's not a training. It's not going to change the way you respond in a crisis, but it'll give you a sense of what a crisis is, and how you can work with the person that's in crisis. So it'll give you a little bit of that cognitive piece, but it's not a skills training, which is what we need to be able to respond better in that actual event. So let me just go through this real quick here. I want to just also say I have three slides built in where we have question breaks. So if you have a question, hold on, and we'll every few minutes we'll stop and take questions, because there's so many topics that we're going to hit on this, and I don't want you to forget your question if we wait till the end. So what is a crisis? So this is based on the World Health Organization model of health. What is health? So a crisis happens when people are in a state of mind in which they're unable to cope with and adjust to stresses of everyday living in a functional and safe way. That's what a crisis is. This is how we're defining it. Unable to cope. They can't cope with the stresses of everyday living in a functional and safe way. So this is about lacking coping techniques. People have coping techniques that are not functional and not safe. So putting substances in your body to change the way you feel is a coping technique, but it's not a functional and safe way. We're seeing so many people die from fentanyl right now and from substance abuse generally. So that's a coping technique. Violence is a coping technique for some people. They feel better after engaging in violence. It's not a functional and safe way to feel better. So how do we learn functional and safe coping techniques? So the person in crisis is unable to to get through those stresses and those feelings that they're having. That's what a crisis is. So we talk about this in a holistic health perspective. My friend out in South Dakota, Leland, little dog, he says, body, heart, mind, and spirit. Physical health, emotional health, mental health, and spiritual health. A lot of times we roll it all into a word, we say mental health, mental illness, but it's not all mental health. Physical health impacts the way you feel emotionally, impacts your mental ability. Your emotional health all these different parts interact with each other. So when we're feeling stressed, sometimes physical exercise helps the emotional piece. It helps the mental piece. The spiritual piece helps the physical. It helps the mental. All these little parts are interacting with each other within us. So think about this as a holistic way. So what we tell the people, the responders, we do training for first responders, don't respond to the behavior, respond to the whole person. And the first question is, well, what do you mean the whole person? So this is one way of thinking about the whole person. There's other holistic health models. Maybe you're familiar with other ways of talking about what holistic is, and what is that whole person. This is one way that's kind of a simple way that helps us see that person. So when we're interacting with that person in crisis, we're not responding to the behavior, we're responding to them. We're thinking about what is their physical health state. So Barbara died in a police call 22 years ago. She had just been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She had been treated for ovarian cancer a few years earlier. Her mom had died of ovarian cancer when she was an infant. So her physical health was part of her crisis. Of course, the responding officers didn't know that about the medical history, but there's that physical piece. Her dad had been involved in the Nazi war crime trials in Europe after World War II. She grew up in a home talking about the Holocaust, talking about human rights, talking about the worst things people can do to each other. So she was active in the peace and justice movement here in this part of the city, and so the history was part of her crisis. She was calling the officers at the door the Satan Squad, her word for the Nazi SS. She was afraid of them. She was connecting them with these historical events. And so, we all have these complex things going on in ourselves, in our complex holistic selves. And so when we interact with that person in crisis, we may not be aware of all these details of physical, emotional, mental, history, culture, all these things that impact who we are, identity. We may not know who that person, but we have to be open to this, because when we're open to that, we're going to learn things from them. What they say, even delusional speech, even completely psychotic people will reveal what's going on. And so we need to listen. That's what we're going to get to later in this, as we go through this. So as we are involved in this, we live in a multicultural, even here in Minneapolis, we live in a multicultural community. Sometimes we don't think about it that way, because we have a dominant culture which tends to override the complexity of the cultural diversity we have here in the city of Minneapolis. But we have a multicultural environment. And so when people are responding to people in a culture different than their own, sometimes they're not understanding what's happening in that communication between the two cultures. How is that being heard? How am I being heard? I don't understand why they're saying or why they're doing what they're doing, that kinds of thing. So as we work with first responders, this is an issue. One of the things we did was we wanted to think about how, when you go in to respond to a crisis, in a culture different from your own, what you need to be aware of. So we went around to the communities, went to the African American, the American Indian, the Latino, the Hmong, the Somali communities, and we asked one question. We went to mental health providers, and community leaders, and we asked this one question. We did this in separate, small little gatherings, just one-on-one or a couple people in these different communities, and they told stories. We asked the question, what is the barrier to de-escalation in your community? What is the major barrier? And as they told these stories, we looked back at the stories and we said they all had the same list. The number one barrier to de-escalation in our communities here in Minneapolis is untreated trauma. When we first started doing this work, when Barbara died, trauma was not on the agenda. It was not part of the conversation. It was about bipolar, schizophrenia, major depression, those kinds of things. But what we see as we go out to community is trauma is an enormous issue, untreated trauma. So, one of those pieces is historical trauma. So, in Barb's family, this is something that affects Barb and her community. Historical trauma, the horrible things that happen to relatives, to grandparents, to parents, even to great-grandparents, are passed down to us through this epigenetic process, which we won't get into gene therapy, the way all this stuff works in the cells and how we pass down information from generation to generation. But we actually do pass these things down. The trauma is passed down, and so untreated trauma, or even a child is assaulted as a young person, is sexually assaulted, or they're beaten on their way to school, or whatever it is that they're in a car accident, whatever it is. Untreated trauma. When you talk multicultural, we're talking about refugee camps. We're talking about experiences. We're talking about people living in war zones, people traumatized migrating to our country, these kinds of things as well. In the African American community, slavery experience had an enormous traumatic impact on the African American community. American Indian community, loss of land, being told their language was diabolical, being punished for speaking their own language. Untreated trauma is a major barrier. So chronic stress. So chronic stress is some of it's economic, chronic unemployment, the roofs leaking, unsafe housing, family violence, people living with stress. Misunderstanding. So that's kind of two sides of that. One is they don't understand what's going to happen to them. That a little bit in the presentation here this morning. That authority figure. Do I trust that authority figure? Do I understand what are they going to do to me? Are they going to lock me up? Are they going to take away my kids? Are they going to take me away from my family? What are they going to do to me? And so that's an issue. They don't understand the process. I heard a story of a person who was in a courtroom, did not understand the difference between the judge, the defense lawyer, the prosecutor, and the bailiff. To that person, they're all cops. They're all interacting with you about your own future, what's going to happen to you, but you don't even understand what's going on. So for a lot of people, I know in a hospital setting, I go and visit, elder relatives and all these specialists and all these, all this equipment and these procedures and tests and stuff. And do we really understand what they're doing? And so for a lot of people, that's a part of crisis. That's a part of crisis. And then insight. So we don't understand inside ourselves. What do I feel? Can I put a name to it? Do I understand what I'm feeling? A lot of people, that's an issue. So that's the third major barrier. And then the final barrier is they just don't trust. They don't trust other people. They've been hurt too many times. They just don't trust. So these are the barriers. So when you're trying to de-escalate, these are things to get past. So the question is, and we didn't get to the techniques yet, but the question is the crisis intervention skills and techniques are called for when? When do you use these techniques? So we say, you believe the person may be feeling they're in crisis. So if you think they're in crisis, use the de-escalation approach. You seek to improve communication. This is just all about communicating with each other. This model that I'm going to show you in a few minutes, when I put that up on the screen with police officers, some say this is the FBI hostage negotiator model. We use it in de-escalation. We did a training for Rikers Island staff, 12 people from Rikers Island, different professions, and we even had an assistant commissioner of mental hygiene. That's the word they use in New York. They don't say mental health, mental hygiene. We had a warden. The psychologist at the training holds up his hand. He goes, we use that same model in therapy over a long period of time. I did a training at Hennepin County, or not a training, a presentation like this, Hennepin County Reserve Officers Association. The people that, they volunteer, help the sheriff. And a gentleman in the back holds up his hand. We use the same model in sales. And then we had these two officers, African-American officers from Montgomery, Alabama, and I was talking to them. They were in our week-long class, and I was saying, what we think is really important is working with your whole community on this. This is not about just you. This is about working with everyone in your community. They said, and it just was striking to me. He said, yeah, we work with our whole community. He said, in our community, it goes from civil rights to Confederacy. We work with everyone. What a challenge. And then he said, when they look at this model, it's a leadership model. This is how you lead your people. So what we're going to talk about, this model that we use to de-escalate, it's really a communication, I think. That's what I've seen, because we use it in so many different ways. So if you want to gain voluntary compliance. So it's just how do you interact with people successfully. So I'll take a little break. If anyone has a question, we can deal with that right now, and then we'll go, because we're going to go on to a bunch of other different topics. So, yes, in the back.
Are you going to give examples, like Barbara Schneider's situation? Like, what could they have done differently?
Yeah, that's the de-escalation part. We'll get to that at the end. I just want to kind of give you a little background before we do that. I don't know if you all heard the question. She was saying, can you give an example and be more practical about it, I think is what I heard. Yeah.
And the skills would be applicable for applying in a family situation when you have a loved one in place?
Absolutely. It's a communication technique. It's a communication model. I think it's different when you have a relationship with a person. This is primarily used by people who are seeing someone that they don't have or necessarily have a relationship with. They're responding as a professional or as a community member that's trying to intervene in a situation. When you have a relationship, now you have a history of events and their opinion of you, et cetera. So it's more complicated. But these same techniques work, do work, but it's probably more difficult. Yeah.
Will you be addressing it all when the individual who's intervening, he or her themselves, either have experienced trauma or find the confrontation with someone going through trauma in itself triggering to their own trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that in the training, and we tell people in the training, because we do as with live actors, and so it's very realistic for people. They feel that they're at work because they feel like the person they're talking to they just talked to last week. They actually say that, and so we tell them if this triggers you, let's step aside. You don't need. It's not a test. We're not trying to test can you survive this. It's about learning how to navigate this process. So, when we're interacting with someone in crisis, that puts us a little bit in crisis. We have this thing called and that's why de-escalation works, because when you slow down, when you calm down, the person follows you. It's the same way when they're highly excited, energized, you feel it. They pull you in their direction emotionally. Yeah, in the back.
Have you found that works with, I work with families with children with autism, have you found that works with children as well, maybe on the spectrum?
Yeah, I think if you're interested in working with people on that spectrum, I think it's a little bit of a different approach. And we have an autism, we get it from the Autism Society. We didn't invent it, but they have a training they do for law enforcement to help the law enforcement understand how they're perceived by that person who is on the spectrum, and then how they can interact with them successfully. And so it's a little bit different than what I'm going to talk about. So if you're interested in that, you can talk to me and I can share some stuff with you. But yeah, it's a little different. Yeah, one more and then I got to keep going so we get through.
On the slide that talked about barriers, one of the items was lack of knowledge or and misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Will you be able to talk about the difference between insight versus somebody with a mental illness who may have anosognosia?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the word she's using means they're not aware that they have an illness. They're not seeing it. And so, that's probably an extreme version, but I think a lot of people, we don't talk about feelings. A lot of people, everything's, people say, well, he's mad at me, or everyone's mad at me. Or I'm mad, or everything's reduced to anger, but no, there's shame, there's embarrassment, there's a million we have. So how do we be more self-aware, so we can see what process we're going through, so how we can work on with ourselves. So that's part of that. That's part of that recovery process is being self-aware. People even with severe mental illness, so even with schizophrenia, actively hallucinating, can be aware of their illness, and then function with it because they see the difference between the symptoms and reality. So, for example, but on a less, obviously, to learn how. So what they're saying is that's one of the is that people they don't see what's going on with them, and so they don't understand what's happening. Feeling this, they have no idea. And one of the reasons people put the substance in the body, they don't know why, they don't know what to do, they don't know what they're feeling. And so anyway, let me just go on because we got a little more we have to do. So, number one, safety first. So this is not about yourself crisis. It's about you staying safe, them staying safe, everyone around them staying safe. Is the idea of slowing things down and keeping everyone safe. So in people, we work with the officers, so it's really striking to me how safety conscious they are. They're thinking about where's the exit. They're thinking about what's a weapon right here. The pen on the table, that's a weapon. So and I don't think about it that way, but they're aware of safety. They sit in a restaurant. They'll always sit there at the back of the hall so they can see everything that's going on. They're always aware of safety. So we have to be aware of that. Be aware of your exit. So in an office setting, for example, a lot of times you have the door, the person sits in front of the desk, right? So if crisis, you have to get by the person. That's a safety question. So be aware of your surroundings and what the potential is. And it's not about being paranoid and constantly being afraid of everything. It's about being aware. Remove potentially hazardous items. You live in an environment where this chair can come a weapon, so it's not about removing everything, but be aware of these things. Keep safe physical distance. So distance is a big issue It's a cultural thing too. Some cultures are nose to nose yelling at each other. They're not fighting. That's how they communicate. And some people, they're standing far. And we have a word in English, standoffish. You're standing too far away. You're being aloof. You're being than me because you're standoffish, because you won't get close. You're afraid of me. It's kind of the idea. So we that. But the other piece of that is you don't get close enough that if the person takes a swing, you're going to be in that arc. So it's just about being these things. Slow down and assess. Slow down and assess. And a lot of people will say after 40 hours, that's the training. That's what the training is. Slow down and assess. Because when you slow down, you're gathering information. You're learning about this whole person. You got to listen to it. You got to get a picture of that person. And they'll tell you what they need, but not directly. But it'll be in there. And so, but you have to listen. Slow down. And it's, because that's how you're going to develop your plan for what to do. So you're in a crisis. The idea of crisis de-escalation is get through the crisis, nobody gets hurt. But once you're through the crisis, what are we going to do? Are we going to go see somebody? Are we going to call somebody? What are we going to do? So as you slow down, you can assess, you can think of a plan. What are we going to do once we get through this crisis moment here? So safety, I put this in because we actually do training with small business people who are having trouble with their customers because people are coming in fighting in the shop. They're fighting about the mask. They're afraid. The person doesn't have a mask, so I'm afraid, and so I'm going to, mask. Or you can't tell me, the government can't tell me what to do, how to live my life. They're mask. You have this dysregulation, which we're clinician, but people are just dysregulated. They're stressed. We've been stressed by these events we're going through, and then now we have world events that are stressing us, and economic events that are. So it just creates a situation where take as much time as needed. Confrontation. Do not use a threat. So we don't want to ever threaten a person because then now you're pushing them back into that crisis realm when you're threatening. This is a model that they say is the FBI hostage negotiator model. It's what they use in sales. It's what they use in therapy. This is the model here. Leadership. Active listening. So you have the person in crisis down here. Let me just say, this is from Dwayne Fusilier, FBI supervisor, PhD psychologist, live in Columbine, Colorado. That's why we have this, because of Columbine. To Columbine High School when that school was assaulted by those young people. The cop, he's FBI. The community member, he was a psychologist. They figured that he would know how to prevent this from ever happening again because he knows all this stuff, and they were afraid this was going to happen again in their school. The parents were, because they had been totally blindsided. They had no idea this was a possibility that these kids were going. And the tragedy is not that it didn't happen again in college. It's happened over and over and over again and around our. But anyway, so he introduced this model to them, a way of thinking about how can you de-escalate your young people? How can you communicate with? How can you work with your young people? So this is the model. Your goal is to get to trust. Trust. So This is not about mental illness. This is not about crisis. This is about human beings. If somebody asks me to do something, I don't trust that person, I'm not going to do what they ask me to do because I don't trust them. We're all that way. So when we're interacting with somebody who's in crisis, do they know we're trustworthy? If they don't know, if they never met us, they don't know. If they've had bad experience with other people that had the white uniform, the brown uniform, the blue uniform, or are the teacher, or whatever authority figure, that you have to prove you're trustworthy. How do you prove you're trustworthy? Listening, active listening. That's how you prove you're trustworthy. You care about what they say. You care about what they think. You're listening to them. You're not telling them. So, and active listening is just, and this is something, it's technique taught to social workers. A lot of people are learning this in higher ed and helping for. If you Google active listening, you'll get a ton of stuff. That'll, the little technique. But active means you're responding to them so they know you're listening. You're bouncing it back at them. You're nodding. You're repeating what they say. You're not responding. It's not conversation. It's you listening to them. You want them to be in storytelling mode. Not, did you eat Wheaties for breakfast this morning? Yes or no. You don't want that. You don't want yes or no. You want, what happened when you woke up this morning? You want a story. Because when you get a story, now you're going to learn about them. And they're going to feel like you care about them because they're telling you what they went through. Even if it's delusional, to you, even if you disagree with everything they say, even if they're insulting you, even if they're calling you names, it doesn't matter. You're listening to them. You want to hear what they say. A lot of people in crisis, no one wants to listen to them because they don't make any sense.
Thinking it.
So they get alienated. They get isolated. Because they're in crisis. So when we're listening, we're throwing them a lifeline. We're giving them our most precious thing, our time. We can never get our time back. We're giving that to them. So this is a challenge for institutions, for a system. So for a hospital, for a clinic, for a school, for a police department, whatever, when you're giving time, you're messing up the workflow. You're taking a staff offline and parking them with a person for extended period, and they can't respond to all this other stuff they need to respond to. Whether it's a nurse in an emergency department who's got too many patients or whatever it is, and so it's important that the institution, that the program, that the agency believe in this approach so they can support the staff. Because you can train the staff, but if their agency doesn't support it, they're not going to do it because they don't work for us. They work for us, right? So active listening, then it goes to empathy. That's the next step. You have to empathize with this person that's threatening, that's calling you names, that's carrying on, that's disrupting everything. It's hard to empathize with that person. But that's the idea. You have to empathize with them. Rapport. Develop rapport. Now you're in a conversational mode. Now you have some level of trust. So when you think of the salesman, this is empathize with you. I want to see it from their point of view so that I can sell it to them. You got this banter going back and forth, between the salesperson and you. You're comfortable with them. You're like kind of, you know how you So now you have the level of trust. Now, when you have trust, now you can influence. Then you can move to behavior change. So this, but let me just and crisis happening today at this time. Something happened. Something happened that triggered this crisis. So there's underlying causes, right? About housing and safety and problems and all kinds of issues that are stresses on the person that are pushing them, pressuring them. But something happened. What is that thing that happened? When you find out what that thing that happened, you come up with a plan. How are we going to help that person? But you can't provide the help if they're not willing to listen to you. So unless why is this happening today at this time? That's going to be in listening mode, helping you get them in storytelling mode, because you're trying to understand what happened, what's going on here. Normal social interaction. So when we all meet each other, and we do it in ways, but we shake hands. We give. My name is. What's your name? We have ways of doing it, and different cultures do it in different ways. But it's a normal social interaction, the way two people who don't know each other interact with each other. When we're in a crisis situation, a lot of times, immediately we go from 0 to 6. No, the person's in crisis. You can say, "Hi, my name is Mark. What's your name?" And you're treating them like just a human being, not like a problem, right? You're the host and they're the guest. How do we all know what that role of a host is, right? You want everyone to get along and enjoy whatever the event is, or we want to take care of people, make sure they get what they need, and we don't want anyone to be frustrated or feel harmed in any way. We just want to take care of everyone. So that's the idea. Be that host. Take on that moment. Make it between no or status difference. When you get into the institutional world in Minnesota, in America, now you've got status, right? You got, I've got this degree, and I have this position, and I have this plaque on my door, and I have these initials after my name, and all these different ways we have status. But when you're de-escalating, you don't want any of that. You want two human beings. You want this heart and that heart, this mind and that mind. Just connecting as two human beings. Ask for the person's name, offer to help, convey that you care, but don't touch the person or move in too close. So that's safety, right? That's safety. But also, it's sometimes it's about us. It's not about them, right? And so we don't want to necessarily do that. But summarize and think about listening. So you're getting a lot of stuff, maybe random things, but then you try and articulate for this insight piece. You're trying to help clarify their thinking by summarizing what you're hearing them say. I understand wear a mask. So just try and articulate for them so they can see that you see what they're feeling, what they're thinking, but also it helps them to get out of that emotional state and think about it as just a concrete thing that there. If the saying separate the person. I used to, you heard earlier, I used to work in the Senate office, Senator Wellstone. So we'd have people come in with the issue, mad at the government about this or that, or whatever it was, or mad at some company, or who knows what. And I always thought about it this way: is you want them on your side of the desk against the problem over there. It's not you against them. You don't have to defend anything. They're not mad at you. They're upset about something that happened, or they're, maybe it's a world historical event they're angry about, a war someplace, or who knows what it is. But you want to have them be on your side against the problem. It's just another way of thinking about that relationship you have with that whole person that you're interacting with. So I got a little sections, but we'll take a minute here if anybody has a question. Yes.
I'm thinking about that, you're trying to be two equals, but in reality, one person may be the person in power.
Yeah.
Could make changes. They
Mm-hmm.
could say, okay, you don't have to wear a mask.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just said you don't have to wear a mask, it might solve the whole issue.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not your policy. So I guess what I'm saying is, is the person in power could overturn their policy to avert the crisis?
So, let's see if I'm responding to your question. I'll give you a little. What I'm saying is that her was in crisis. She was in her home. 6 police officers in her home. She had a knife. They're yelling. I'm in charge. You have to do what I say. No, that's not the way to do it. So, but then when as you get, you have some level of trust and behavior. You could do this, or I could make, or whatever. In your interaction, you don't want to have any of that. It needs to be two human beings. Human beings, yes.
Well, just saying, after leave authority out of the picture
Right.
first.
Exactly.
The most difficult part of this, in my personal experience, is that part of not either to the behavior or even the person,
Mm-hmm.
but focusing exclusively on the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not used to doing that. I
Mm-hmm.
was not used to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably the answer to take my course. Train ourselves to ignore the cognitive content
Mm-hmm.
and focus on the emotional content,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can respond. You're feeling like this. I hear you feel this, and
Mm-hmm.
believe that. I understand your anger.
Mm-hmm.
I understand you're feeling hurt. It feels frustrating. It feels overwhelming. Nothing about whatever they're saying the problem is, or
Right.
how they're conceiving it. How do we get better at that?
Well, I would just, I'm not an expert at this. You probably know more about this than I do, but I would say that it's about, well, what we do is we put them in that situation, and then we ask them to do that, and then we stop the action. We talk about it. And we talk about what's happening here. What are you seeing? What's going on with this person that's in crisis? It's a character. It's not a human being. It's a character portrayed by the actor. But what's going on with them? What you know? And then how do you respond to that? You know, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? And then the people that are observing, ask them, what did you do working? What you hear is, yeah, pick up the rock and turn it over. Look at it, examine it, think about it. You know, and then this is what we don't do in crisis, right? The crisis is over. We're like, thank God that's over with, and we want to go back to normal, right? We don't want to think about it and talk about it. So we ask the person, the people observing, and they see things that the person in crisis didn't see. Because when you're responding to a person in crisis, now you're a little bit in crisis too. This is the fight or flight response. It's an automatic response. Every animal has it. It protects the body. It's protecting life is what it's doing by fighting or fleeing. So we get that. We have that fight or flight response when we're encountered by a person in crisis. And so what the fight or flight response does is the brain is focusing on survival. It's actually shutting down, and I'm not a brain expert. This is what I read. It's actually shutting down higher thinking. So complex thoughts are much more difficult when you're under stress. People report tunnel vision. So in a combat environment where they're trying to kill you and you kill them, you get tunnel vision. Literally, they describe it. You have people firing a weapon next to the ear of the person in that environment, in that combat environment, kill or be killed. They don't hear the gun go off. There's no impact on the hearing. There's no ringing of the ears. There's no damage. It's amazing. The brain shuts stuff down when you're in stress. So when you're responding to that person in crisis, you're not in that super extreme, they're going to kill me, I'm going to kill them environment. But you have a little bit of that. You don't. So when we ask people that are observing, they say, when you said her name, she looked right at you. Or they say, when your speech slowed down too. So they see stuff because they're not under stress. So that's how we do it. We talk about it, we examine it, and then people, we ask them to take this back, do this at work, talk to each other about this stuff, coach each other. Some people are good at de-escalation, need training, and probably or whatever, but they're really good at it. So learn from them. Yeah.
Talking to your question, a book written by Dr. Xavier Amador, and he talks about the LEAP method. And this is very specific to de-escalating somebody with mental illness. And the LEAP is listen, empathize, agree, and partner. And he has practice cases in the book so that you can actually role play and do it. And the more you're familiar with these, it's specific to mental illness. And I just highly recommend the LEAP Institute online is really helpful.
Okay. Let me go on because we're I got to squeeze all this in here. So now we're back to the stairway. We're on empathy here. Somebody asked me the question, if it's de-escalation, why are we going up the stairway? So I said, think of it as you can be in a downward spiral. We all know the downward spiral, right? Doubt, fear, lack of self-confidence, all the bad things that are going to happen, you're going down, you're getting sucked up. Then there's an upward spiral, hope, possibilities, the future thinking. So how do we reverse that downward spiral into an upward spiral? That's another way of thinking about this idea of de-escalation. Anyway, I just had to make that point. But so empathy, we're talking a little bit about empathy. So some of you may not be big NFL fans, but I would just, if I'm looking at this player, he's lying on the ground, I do empathize with him. He's hurting. But he's doing what he's dreamed of his whole life. He's out on that field in the National Football League, and I don't feel sorry for him. He's achieved what he wanted to achieve. He's in pain. So, you know, the idea is not sympathy.
Just use my mic.
Listen, empathize, build rapport. The problem is when you're responding to someone in crisis, it's really hard to empathize with them. You know, when we work with the officers, and they're like, "This guy's this," you know, these words, you know, the criminal. And I won't use the words, but you know the words from TV, cop shows, that they use to describe people that are harming people in the community. How am I supposed to empathize with this person who just did this to somebody in his family, or who just did this in the community? How am I supposed to empathize with that person? So the idea is, you know, that there's in every person. This gets into our criminal justice. This is a little philosophy about our criminal justice system. But within every person, there's a positive core. There's a goodness in there. That's who the grandma loves. Is that goodness in that child, even with all the chaos that they're creating. So how do we with that little piece, empathize with that little piece, not with all the chaos, not with all the harm they're causing. We don't have to empathize with that. We empathize with that little positive core in there. We work with that. That's that rehab piece. That's that recovery piece. That's that wellness. You know, moving beyond crisis, recovery, wellness. Having to work with it and grow that piece. Not being double negative against the bad, but being for the good and trying to encourage that good piece. So it's hard. But what I find is that we work with this by bringing in people to, you know, and they use the word tell their story. People that have been in crisis. And we look for people that have been incarcerated who have been in crisis too, because we go with the extreme, because we want people to see the extremes in these things, because less extreme. But the nurses want more of that. Want more of the. I'm surprised. I was surprised to hear that at the nurses, because they're so empathetic anyway. You know, as a profession, that's their idea, is just personal care for that human being in that hospital bed. But for them, what it is they see that person acutely ill. So they're coming in and they're maybe totally unresponsive, and they're talking to them in a kind and caring way. They don't know. Does it have any impact? Am I a complete failure as a nurse? You bring the person in, and it's not the person they treated. How they, just that kind word, just that loving. The one example, Charles Jansen, 7 for mental illness, which was so he kept doing it. So recycled through mental health and criminal justice. Charles said, we have the way she and he felt the humanity, because he felt so isolated. And so that little 20 years goose and a patrol highway practically got killed by a truck, and then the next car in the state of Oregon, and when he was hitchhiking around and he was stealing food and sleeping wherever, to the local hospital, mental health. And when he said, Charles says he went off and he did his paperwork or something, and then he came back, and Charles is landing on a gurney. He said he put his hand on my ankle and said, Charles, take good care. And to him that was powerful. And it's such a small thing. I'm sure this officer never remembers having done that. He probably did it a million times in his career. But these little things. So that helps with empathy. So that's how we deal with empathy, is have them tell the story. So anyway. Able.
Okay.
It is being recorded as well.
Yeah, that's what I was curious if it was that.
Personally, don't take it personally. It's not about you. Don't get upset about it. And this goes back to coping, right? Can't cope with the stresses of everyday living. We have to be able to environment. We're getting this stuff thrown at us, and not let it. One question, and then I got a couple more slides. Yeah.
So let's say the police are called and somebody's got somebody kidnapped, and they tell them, if you let the guy go, you won't have any consequences. That's not true. So how do they get out of that? And how do they get the drugs? And how does everybody come out unscathed?
Well, lying is not good.
They do that on TV all the time. Like they
Well, yeah. Yeah, so we tell them, don't ever promise something that you can't deliver, because now you're breaking trust. So you maybe never see this person again, but another guy that wears the same uniform you do will, and they're not going to cooperate with him because of what you did. So don't mess it up for everyone else just because it's convenient for you to tell this untruth. That's what we tell them. But this is the culture change that we're trying to go through, and here in the city of Minneapolis, frankly, how do we move from use of force to the mode of taking care of people? What they say on the quad car is to serve and protect. How do we move to that mode? And so we have to have these hard conversations. Going, because I got. So if you need help, to have a way of de-escalation, talk to them, watch them. Why did you do it that way? Your administration and your agency or whatever, or you're a. So a family is the same as a company, right? I mean, you have elders who have a lot of experience. Talk to them, or talk to the work with your people that you're in your. Seven county metro area, it's a county. So call them. That's an alternative to the 911 call. So that's calling a mental health professional. And they can respond, but they're way understaffed. Hennepin County is so huge, both number of people and geographically. But they're at it, they're with the county, so they probably know the history of this person you're talking to, because they get sent at the computer. They can call them up, and so they can give advice over the phone. Obviously, they can't reveal information, but they can coach you on stuff. So that's a good one. Now there's this new 988, right? The new they used to call it the suicide hotline. Now it's just a general crisis line, and that's still being a work in progress. Some agencies respond to. So one question is, are you a veteran? If you're a veteran, you have stuff that nobody else has access to at the VA. Suicide, there's a suicide. Go on their website. This is a link, but so many programs that are in Hennepin County. And then these are some of the phone numbers. Those are on the blue card there. That's in the back there. And then this is also on the blue card. This is just to kind of get you in the frame, in the mind frame when you're going into a situation like this. Don't take control if you don't have to. Express your concern. Listen to their story, etc. This. Carry heart, mind, and spirit. Take care of your physical health. Get to sleep. Eat the right foods. Get the exercise. We all know what we're supposed to do, but we have to build it in. We have to build routines. We have to support ourselves, our own. Your heart. Do stuff you love. Be with people you care about. Your mind. Read, learn. Work in your spiritual community, in your faith community. Oh, thank you.